The restaurant was silent, except for the clatter of a single pan hitting the floor. Every eye in the fancy dining room turned to the kitchen door, where a woman in a plain dress stood, holding a steaming dish that smelled like nothing anyone had ever smelled before. Her hand shook, but her face was calm, too calm. The head chef, Mr. Laurent, stood frozen, his mouth open, his eyes wide with shock. Waiters stopped mid-step. Customers leaned forward in their seats, forks hanging in the air. The dish she held glowed under the restaurant's golden lights like it was magic. Then a single spark leaped from the plate, and a customer gasped. Was it alive? What was this dish? And how did this quiet, ordinary woman who wasn't even a cook make something that made the whole restaurant feel like the world had just flipped upside down? Let's go back to the start of the day, when nobody knew what was coming. The Golden Spoon was the fanciest restaurant in town. Its walls sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and the tables were covered with white cloths, so clean they shone. Mr. Laurent, the chef, was famous for his perfect dishes. People came from all over to taste his food, and he loved being the star. He was tall, with a sharp nose and a loud voice that scared everyone in the kitchen. Perfection! He'd shout, tossing out any dish that wasn't just right. That morning, a woman named Lila walked into the restaurant. Lila was quiet, with messy brown hair and a plain dress that looked like it came from a thrift store. She wasn't rich or fancy, she was just a cleaner who mopped the floors after the restaurant closed. Nobody paid much attention to her. She kept her head down, did her job, and left. But today, something was different. Lila had a small notebook in her pocket, filled with scribbled recipes she'd never shown anyone. She loved cooking at home, but it was just for her simple meals made from whatever she could afford. Mr. Laurent was in a bad mood that day. A big food critic was coming to the restaurant that night, and he wanted everything perfect. He was yelling at the cooks, throwing spoons, and making everyone nervous. "If this critic doesn't love my food, we're ruined," he shouted. That's when he saw Lila mopping in the corner. Maybe it was his bad mood, or maybe he just wanted to feel powerful, but he decided to pick on her. "Hey, you!" Mr. Laurent called, pointing at Lila. Everyone turned to look. Lila froze, her mop dripping water on the floor. "You think you can do better than my cooks? Ha! Make us a dish for the critic tonight," he laughed, and the other cooks snickered. It was a joke. Lila wasn't a chef. She was just the cleaner. Everyone expected her to blush and run away, but Lila didn't run. She looked at Mr. Laurent, her eyes steady. "Okay," she said softly. The kitchen went quiet. Mr. Laurent's smile faded. "What did you say?" he asked. Lila repeated, "I'll make a dish." The cook stared. Was she serious? Mr. Laurent laughed again, but it sounded nervous. "Fine," he said. "You have until tonight. Don't embarrass me." Lila nodded and walked to the pantry, her notebook clutched tight. The cooks whispered behind her back. "She's crazy," one said. "She'll burn the kitchen down," said another. But Lila didn't hear them. She was already pulling out strange ingredients, things nobody used, like weird spices and old herbs tucked in the back of the pantry. She moved like she knew exactly what she was doing, and that made everyone a little uneasy. By afternoon, the kitchen was buzzing with rumors. Customers started hearing about the cleaner who thinks she's a chef. Some laughed, but others were curious. Who was this woman? Why wasn't she scared? Mr. Laurent watched her from the corner, his arms crossed. He thought this would be funny, but now he wasn't so sure. Lila was mixing something in a bowl, and the smell was strange. Not bad, but different. It made his nose tingle. He shook his head. "She's going to ruin everything," he muttered. As the sun set, the restaurant filled with people. The food critic arrived, a tall man with a notebook of his own. Everyone was nervous, especially Mr. Laurent. He kept checking his own dishes, making sure they were perfect. But he couldn't stop glancing at Lila. She was still cooking, her hands moving fast, her face focused. The smell from her dish was getting stronger, spreading through the kitchen. It wasn't like anything Mr. Laurent had ever smelled before. Was it good? Was it bad? He couldn't tell. Then, just as the critic sat down, Lila turned around, holding her finished dish. The kitchen door swung open, and she stepped into the dining room. The smell hit first, then the sight of her dish, a glowing, shimmering plate of something nobody could name. And that's when the spark jumped from the plate, and the whole restaurant gasped. The spark from Lila's dish fizzled in the air, and the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The food critic, Mr. Harrow, leaned forward, his sharp eyes locked on the plate. It wasn't just food, it looked like a piece of art, glowing with soft colors, like a sunset trapped in a dish. The smell was sweet, spicy, and something else nobody could name. Waiters stood frozen. Customers whispered. Mr. Laurent's face turned red. He hadn't expected this. Lila, the quiet cleaner, stood there, her plain dress out of place in the fancy dining room, holding a dish that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Mr. Harrow raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. Lila opened her mouth to answer, but then, crash. A glass fell from a waiter's tray, shattering on the floor. Everyone jumped. Was it an accident? Or did someone want to stop what was about to happen? Let's go back a few hours to the chaos of the kitchen after Lila agreed to cook. The other cooks couldn't stop talking about her. "She's not even trained," said Maria, the sous chef, chopping onions so fast her knife was a blur. "She's going to make us look like fools." Another cook, Tom, laughed. "Maybe she'll serve the critic a mop stew." They all giggled, but their laughs sounded nervous. Lila wasn't acting like someone who was scared. She was calm, too calm, and that made them uneasy. Lila worked in a corner of the kitchen, away from the others. Her notebook was open on the counter, its pages filled with tiny handwriting and little drawings of plants and spices. She wasn't using the fancy ingredients Mr. Laurent loved, like caviar or truffles. Instead, she picked things nobody touched. Dusty jars of cumin, a bag of dried chilies, and some weird green leaves from the back of the pantry. She even pulled out a small vial of golden liquid from her pocket. Nobody saw where it came from, but when she poured a drop into her pot, the air shimmered. Maria stopped chopping and stared. "What was that?" she whispered to Tom. He shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave Lila. Mr. Laurent kept watching too. He told himself this was still a joke, but his stomach twisted. What if Lila's dish was good? What if it was better than his? He pushed the thought away. "She's nobody," he muttered. But when Lila started humming a soft, strange tune that made the kitchen feel warm, he felt a chill. Her dish was starting to smell amazing. Not like his fancy sauces or perfectly cooked steaks. This was different, like a memory of something you couldn't quite remember. By late afternoon, the restaurant was packed. Word had spread about the cleaner who dared to cook for the critic. Some customers came just to see the disaster they expected. Others, though, felt something in the air, a buzz, like something big was coming. Lila didn't notice the whispers or the stares. She was lost in her work, stirring her pot, adding a pinch of this and a dash of that. The other cooks started to get quiet. The smell from Lila's dish was spreading, making their mouths water. Even Maria, who hated the idea of Lila cooking, sniffed the air and frowned. "That doesn't smell bad," she admitted. Mr. Laurent couldn't take it anymore. He stormed over to Lila's station. "What are you making?" he demanded. Lila looked up, her eyes soft but steady. "It's a recipe from my grandma," she said. "It's called Starlight Stew." Mr. Laurent laughed, but it sounded forced. "Starlight Stew? That's not even a real dish." Lila just smiled and kept stirring. The golden liquid in her pot bubbled, and for a second, it looked like tiny stars were dancing inside. As the evening went on, the tension grew. The The critic, Mr. Harrow, arrived, and the whole restaurant felt like it was holding its breath. Mr. Harrow arrived. Laurent presented his dishes first: perfect lobster, creamy soup, and a chocolate dessert that looked like a sculpture. Mr. Harrow nodded, scribbling in his notebook, but he didn't smile. "Very nice," he said, his voice flat. Mr. Laurent's face fell. He needed more than nice. He needed perfect. Then it was Lila's turn. The kitchen door opened, and she stepped out with her dish. The room went quiet. The smell hit first, then the sight of the glowing plate. Mr. Laurent's heart sank. This wasn't a joke anymore. Mr. Harrow leaned closer, his pen hovering over his notebook. Lila set the dish down, and that's when the spark jumped from the plate, like a tiny firework. The crowd gasped. Mr. Harrow's eyes widened. He reached for his fork, ready to taste it. But then, crash! The glass hit the floor, and everyone turned. A waiter stood there, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry," he stammered, but his eyes weren't on the glass. They were on Lila's dish, and they were full of fear. Had he dropped the glass on purpose? And why did he look so scared? The shattered glass sparkled on the floor, reflecting the golden glow of Lila's dish. The waiter, a young man named Sam, stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at the starlight stew. The whole restaurant was silent, every head turned toward him. Mr. Harrow, the critic, paused, his fork hovering over the glowing plate. Lila's calm face flickered with something worry, or was it something deeper, like she knew a secret nobody else did? Mr. Laurent pushed through the crowd, his voice booming. "What's wrong with you, Sam? Clean that up." But Sam didn't move. He pointed at Lila's dish, his voice shaking. That dish. It's not normal." The crowd gasped. Mr. Harrow leaned closer, squinting at the stew, where another tiny spark danced across the surface. Then, before anyone could stop him, Sam shouted, "Don't eat it!" and lunged toward the plate, knocking it to the floor. The dish shattered and a burst of light exploded from the stew, blinding everyone in the room. Let's rewind a few hours to understand why Sam was so scared. Back in the kitchen, while Lila was cooking, Sam had been watching her more closely than anyone else. He was new at the Golden Spoon, just a teenager trying to save money for school. He wasn't like the other waiters who laughed at Lila and called her crazy. Sam noticed things. He saw how Lila's hands moved, steady and sure, like she'd done this 1,000 times. He saw the golden vial she poured into her pot, the one that made the air shimmer, and he heard her humming a tune that made his heart beat faster, like it was pulling at a memory he couldn't quite grab. Sam had a secret of his own. When he was little, his grandma used to tell him stories about a village far away, where people cooked magic into their food. Starlight stew, she'd said, wasn't just food. It could show you truths about yourself you might not want to see. Sam thought they were just stories, but when Lila said the name of her dish, his stomach twisted. He'd watched her all day, sneaking glances as she worked. The smell of her stew made him feel warm and safe, but also scared, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. By the time the restaurant opened for dinner, Sam was a wreck. He kept dropping trays and tripping over his own feet. The other waiters teased him, but Lila noticed. She caught his eye once and smiled, soft and kind, like she understood. That only made Sam more nervous. What if his grandma's stories were true? What if this dish wasn't just food? He tried to tell himself he was being silly, but when Lila walked out with her glowing plate, his heart raced. The sparks, the smell, the way the air felt alive, it was all too much. In the dining room, Mr. Laurent was sweating. His dishes had been served, and Mr. Harrow's very nice comment still stung. He needed a win, but now Lila's dish was stealing the show. Customers were whispering, pointing at the glowing stew. Some looked excited, others nervous. Mr. Laurent clenched his fists. This was supposed to be a joke. How was Lila, a cleaner, making something that looked like it came from a dream? When Lila set the dish in front of Mr. Harrow, Sam couldn't take it anymore. He remembered his grandma's warning. Starlight stew shows the truth, but not everyone can handle it. What if it showed something terrible? What if it ruined the restaurant or worse? His hands shook as he carried a tray of glasses, and when he saw that spark leap from the plate, his fear took over. He dropped the tray, maybe on purpose. Maybe Knowlton shouted, "Don't eat it!" Before he could think, he lunged, knocking the dish to the floor. The crash was deafening, but the light that burst from the stew was brighter. It filled the room, warm and golden, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Customers shielded their eyes. Mr. Laurent yelled, "What have you done?" But when the light faded, everyone gasped again. The stew hadn't spilled. It was floating, tiny glowing droplets hovering above the broken plate, swirling like a galaxy. Lila stood still, her eyes wide but not surprised. Mr. Harold stood up, his notebook forgotten, staring at the floating stew. "Impossible," he whispered. Sam backed away, his face pale. "I didn't mean," he stammered, but nobody was listening. The customers were on their feet, some clapping, some whispering in awe. Mr. Laurent's mouth hung open. This wasn't just a dish, it was something else entirely. Lila looked at Sam, her eyes soft but sharp, like she knew why he was scared. Then she turned to Mr. Harrow and said, "I can make another." The restaurant was a mess of whispers and wide eyes. The floating droplets of starlight stew hovered like tiny stars above the broken plate, casting a soft glow over the stunned crowd. Mr. Harrow, the critic, stood frozen, his fork still in hand, staring at the impossible sight. Customers murmured, some pulling out their phones to record, others backing away as if the stew might explode. Mr. Laurent's face was a mix of anger and fear at Sam for ruining the moment, and fear that Lila, the cleaner he mocked, had created something beyond his understanding. Lila stood quietly, her plain dress glowing faintly from the stew's light. She looked at Sam, who was trembling in the corner, and said again, "I can make another." Her voice was soft, but it cut through the noise like a bell. Then, from the back of the room, a woman screamed, "It's moving!" Everyone turned. The floating droplets were swirling faster, forming a shape of face in the air. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished, leaving the room dark and silent. Let's go back a bit to the moments after the dish shattered. Sam was shaking, his mind racing with his grandma's stories. "Starlight stew shows the truth," she said, "but some truths break people." He didn't know what truth the stew might show, but he felt it in his bones, something big, something scary. He hadn't meant to knock the dish over. His body had moved on its own, like it was trying to protect him. Now, as the crowd stared at the empty spot where the stew had floated, Sam felt every eye on him. Mr. Laurent stormed over, grabbing his arm. "You idiot," he hissed. "You've ruined us." But before Sam could answer, Lila stepped forward. "It's okay," she said. "I'll start over." Her calm made Mr. Laurent angrier. "Start over? You think this is a game?" he shouted. Lila didn't flinch. She just nodded and walked back to the kitchen. The other cooks were too shocked to mock her now. Maria, the sous chef, whispered to Tom, "Did you see that? The stew floated." Tom nodded, his eyes wide. They followed Lila to the kitchen, watching as she pulled out the same strange ingredients: dusty spices, dried chilies, and that mysterious golden vial. But this time she added something new, a small, shimmering stone from her pocket. It looked like a pebble, but when she dropped it into the pot, the air hummed, like a song you could feel in your chest. The cook stepped back. Even Mr. Laurent, who'd followed her in, stopped yelling. He watched, his mouth tight, as Lila stirred the pot, humming that strange tune again. The restaurant outside was buzzing. Customers refused to leave, even though Mr. Harrell hadn't tasted anything yet. Some said the stew was magic, others thought it was a trick. A few older customers whispered about old Legends dishes that could change hearts or reveal secrets. Mr. Harrell sat quietly, scribbling in his notebook, his face unreadable. Sam, still shaken, was sent to clean the broken glass, but he kept glancing at the kitchen door. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. Something about Lila's dish pulled at him, like it was calling his name. As Lila cooked, the smell of Starlight stew filled the restaurant again, stronger this time. It made people smile, but it also made them nervous. One customer, an old man with a cane, stood up and said, "I know that smell. It's from the old country." He looked at Lila with wide eyes, like he'd seen a ghost. Before anyone could ask what he meant, Lila stepped out of the kitchen, holding a new plate. The stew glowed brighter than before, and tiny sparks danced inside it like fireflies. She set it in front of Mr. Harrell, who stared at it, then at her. "What is this?" he asked again. Lila smiled. "Just taste it." Mr. Harrell lifted his fork, and the room held its breath. But then the old man with the cane shouted, "Wait!" He hobbled forward, his face pale. "That dish is not just food. It's dangerous." He pointed at Lila, his hands shaking. "Who are you, really?"